If you ache for truth, goodness, and beauty, if you're hungry for a Christianity with substance and strength, if you long for a faith that's big and bold and biblical and all about Jesus Christ, if you're inspired by the idea of one church that has spanned 20 centuries, 24 time zones, and 2 hemispheres, enfolding every race, nation, and language, then you're considering Catholicism. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today, I want to dive into something that's been rattling around in my head for a while. I've thought about recording this before, but for whatever reason, haven't. But some things lately that I've been seeing online, just brought it to the forefront, and I thought it was a good time to bring it up. Some things that I see going on in the evangelical world and the mainline Protestant world, and some of the things I'm reading from some parts of the Catholic world going into the conclave, which is starting as I release this, the day after I release this. To get into this topic for today, I want to recall a line from Flannery O'Connor. Flannery O'Connor was a Catholic novelist and short story writer, a woman. From the name Flannery, that's not clear. Some of you have heard of her, I'm sure, and some of you may have read her stuff. She wrote in the mid part of the 20th century, American Catholic writer, Southern writer, interesting writer. Read her novels and some of her short stories, and some of them I've really liked, and some of them were, I think, okay. But she was a very devout Catholic writer who brought her Catholicism into her very unique stories that she's told. But anyway, O'Connor once said this about the Eucharist. She said, if it's only a symbol, then to hell with it. Man, that's punchy, right? If it's only a symbol, then to hell with it. She wasn't messing around. She was talking about the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, that Christ is actually present in the bread and wine, which is Catholic doctrine. And that is Catholic teaching because it's biblical teaching. And she's saying it's not just a nice metaphor, not just a nice symbol. And her point, which cuts pretty deep, is if the sacred stuff of Catholicism, the sacraments, the liturgy, all the smells and bells, if all of that is just symbols, if it's all just props, then what's the point? Why bother? And that question hit me hard during my own journey into the church. So back in the late 90s, I was a Protestant minister, and I was wrestling with big questions about faith. And at that time, I had an experience in the late 90s that forced me to ask, is Catholicism true? Not just is Catholicism pretty, not just is Catholicism inspiring, not just does Catholicism have historical gravitas, but is Catholicism actually true? Now, I'll share that anecdote of what happened to me in the late 90s in a bit. But today, the thing I really want to talk about is why the reality of Catholic sacraments and the aesthetics of the liturgy and Catholic architecture and art and all of that, why all of that matters so much, and why it's a problem when people treat the sacraments and aesthetics and art and liturgy like costumes or stage sets for a show. Now, I've noticed 3 groups that do this. You have liberal Protestants playing dress up with Catholic vibes. You have evangelicals borrowing our aesthetics to rebrand their worship and give it gravitas. But worst of all, you have some, I don't know what the right word is, progressive, liberal, whatever, leftist Catholic clergy who wear the vestments but ditch the doctrine, who want to be clothed in all of the accoutrements of the Catholic Church, but have stopped believing that Catholicism is really true. And you're seeing some of those folks become vocal going into this conclave because they hope that they will get a new pope who will use the accoutrements and the platform and the aesthetics of his office to drive a sort of leftist agenda because they don't believe that the doctrines of the church are necessarily true anymore. And to all of that's where that Flannery O'Connor quote came to my mind, because if it's all just symbols, then to hell with it. But what if it's true? What if Catholicism is true? What if the sacraments, the liturgy, the smells, the bells, the art, the architecture, what if all of that is actually true? Because if it is, it changes everything. And of course, I think that it is, but let's dive into this. So, what makes Catholic sacraments and aesthetics so special? Why do they matter? For Catholics, sacraments like the Eucharist or baptism aren't just symbols. They're real encounters with God's grace. The Catechism puts it beautifully. This is Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 1131. It says that the sacraments are, quote, efficacious signs of grace instituted by Christ. Efficacious means that they actually do something. When you or I receive the Eucharist, we're not just remembering Jesus. We're receiving him, body, blood, soul, and divinity. It's not just a metaphor, it's a miracle. And the same thing goes for sacramentals, things like incense and holy water or those gorgeous vestments that priests wear. They're not just props to set the mood. They actually point us to the divine. They sanctify our lives. And the aesthetics of Catholicism, the Gothic cathedrals, the Gregorian chant, the stained glass, they're not just beautiful or pretty or inspiring. They're designed to actually lift your soul to God. For 2,000 years, the church has used these things to draw people into the reality of Christ, not just to put on a show. Now, here's the flip side. If these things are just symbols, just aesthetics, then they're meaningless. If the Eucharist is just bread, if incense is just a vibe, if a cathedral is just a cool-looking building, then why bother? And that's where Flannery O'Connor got it right, because if it's only a symbol, then to hell with it. And that's what I had to wrestle with when I was considering Catholicism. Was it true? Was it real? Because if it wasn't, I wasn't going to waste my time or my life chasing something where there was no payoff. There was no there. And I don't mean payoff in the sense that I got something out of it. I guess you do. But I mean that if you followed this road to Rome, you would come to an actual place, a place of truth. But see, here's the thing. Not everybody gets this. I've noticed, as I said a moment ago, 3 groups who take Catholic aesthetics, our smells, our bells, our vestments, all that glorious stuff, and use it like a costume, which strips it of its meaning. So let's start with liberal Protestants, especially those in mainline denominations that are, frankly, fading fast, dying out. You've seen this online, right? You have these clergy who identify as I don't know what, trans, lesbian, non-binary, whatever. And they're all decked out in these elaborate chasubles, Roman collars, stoles. Man, they love stoles. And they're surrounded by candles and incense, doing these. But the words that are coming out of their mouths, the things that they're talking about in their homilies, and the things they add into it, it all becomes weird rituals that sound almost like some kind of neo-pagan TED Talk. It's like they're hijacking Catholic aesthetics because those aesthetics still have a kind of like brand equity. When you look at that, you look at the chasubles and the candles and the altars and the cathedrals and the stained glass and all that stuff, they evoke the sacred in our society. They feel credible, even if what's being preached is basically Gaia worship or self-help therapy. There's this term cosplay, right? Costume play. This is where people dress up like Lord of the Rings characters or Marvel superhero characters and go to conventions or something, and they pretend to be those characters because, like, I'm dressed like a hobbit or I'm dressed like Iron Man or whatever. It's called cosplay. And this is cosplay. It's not Christianity. These liberal mainline Protestants, especially a lot of the feminist or LGBTQ stripe that make that an ideology, they borrow the church's look to dress up their own ideas, but there's no substance there. It's all aesthetics, only aesthetics. There's no truth. And that takes me back to this anecdote, this moment in my own journey that I want to share because it's connected. And I have talked about this before on the podcast over the years, but bring it up again here. So back in the late 90s, I was on a boat heading to Skellig Michael. So Skellig Michael is this tiny rocky island off the coast of Ireland. It rises right up out of the sea, about 12 miles off the west coast. And I could talk a lot about it. It became famous because in one of the more recent Star Wars movies where the character went to find where Luke Skywalker had retired, they filmed it on Skellig Michael, which is, again, weird because they were trying to evoke something spiritual and magical. So they filmed it there. But it's a UNESCO site now. So it's famous for its ancient monastic settlement. So there are these beehive stone huts. There's only, I don't know, like 6 or 8 of them, because there were only ever 12 or 13 monks at a time that lived on the island. Part of Irish monasticism at the time was that a group of monks would be replicating Jesus and the 12 apostles. And so they're like 600 feet in the air on these rocky ledges and these beehive huts. Go Google Skellig Michael, Skellig Michael, and you'll see these amazing pictures. So these monks lived on these little beehive huts on these ledges over the Atlantic Ocean, and they would pray and fast. And really one of the harshest places that you can imagine, the cold, the wind, the storms, all those kinds of things. And the boat that I took over there, the boat that you take to see it, is small. There's maybe only a few dozen people can be on it, go up on Skellig at the time because you get up these narrow stone steps. And so there are a few dozen of us. Some of the people on the boat were Catholics making a pilgrimage. Some were tourists like me, frankly, at the time. And then there were a bunch of these New Age types. You know the ones. These are folks, they've been to Machu Picchu, they've been to Sedona, they've been to the pyramids, and now they're checking Skellig Michael off their New Age bucket list because it's supposedly a spiritual vortex or something. So I go up the steps and I'm sitting in one of these beehive huts and I'm looking out at the Atlantic and I'm thinking about those monks. Like, why did they come here? Why would anyone give their life to live in this wind-battered, freezing place in this little stone hut? And as I'm contemplating this, 8 feet outside the door, there's a couple of New Agers, and they've got one of these rain sticks. I don't know if you've seen this, it's like a 4-foot-long thing. It's like a hollow, I don't know what's made out of, some stick thing. And it's got, I think it's I don't know what, it's like a branch of some Amazon tree or something. And it's got little either seeds in it or little ball bearings or something. And they shake it. And it sounds like rain. And so anyway, I'm sitting there trying to contemplate Catholicism and monasticism and its significance. And I've started on my road to Rome at that point, but I'm really grappling with this. And outside, 6-8 feet outside, they're shaking their rain sticks and they're chanting some gibberish about the Earth's magnetic fields. I'm not kidding. And it's just super distracting to me. But that was a moment where it hit me that those monks didn't come here for aesthetics. And they weren't here for the vibes or because Skellig Michael was some cosmic energy hotspot. They gave their lives to this place, to Christ in this place, because they believed that Catholicism was true. They believed that Christ was real, that the Eucharist was real, that the church was real. And that moment sitting in that hut forced me to ask myself, were they right? Is it true? Because if it's not, then it's just a rock in the ocean. And they were wasting their time, and I'm wasting my time visiting it. So, kind of the first group that I think hijacks Catholic aesthetics and sacraments for cosplay are these sort of liberal mainline, what's left of those denominations. Some of those folks, especially some of, like I said, the feminist ministers there, to gain credibility, they play dress up. Okay, but let's now move to the second group that I think hijacks Catholic aesthetics, and that's some evangelicals. Okay, now I came out of the world. I love my evangelical brothers and sisters. But some of them are starting to realize that people are hungry for more than TED Talk sermons, and praise band concerts with light shows and whatnot. And so you see this movement among some evangelicals to start to borrow Catholic aesthetics. So you'll see them starting to use incense and candles and maybe some more chant, praise and worship music and some of these things to make their worship feel deeper and more serious and more traditional. And people go, oh, I feel like I'm getting into like deeper spirituality. And I know evangelical pastors who say, we've got these elements now, so we're basically the same as Catholics. I've had this conversation with some evangelical pastors where I'm like, I became Catholic, and they're like, we do those things at our church now too. We're sharing in this like Catholic spirituality that you have. I'm like, no, you're not. Because for them, those things are just aesthetics. They're props to enhance the experience. They're not sacramentals tied to God's grace. It's like rebranding a coffee shop or a brewery to look like a cathedral because cathedrals feel cool. Well, we've seen this. We've seen old churches turned into brew pubs. And you go in there, you go, oh, like this is it's super cool and it's serious. I've been in those places with those people, and they're like, oh, we're partaking in something deeper and more meaningful. But see, the thing is, if you actually don't believe the Eucharist is Christ, if you don't believe that incense is a prayer rising to God, if you don't believe all of the premises that lie underneath all of that stuff, then it's just a costume or props or a stage set. It's not the same thing. Those monks on Skellig Michael weren't lighting candles for the ambiance. They were worshiping the God they believed was truly present. And that brings me to the third group, which is honestly, I believe, the worst because it's inside the house. And I'm talking about progressive Catholic bishops and priests, some of them in places like the German Bishops' Conference, where the church is in pretty rough shape, who don't really believe the doctrines of the church anymore. They don't just want to change the doctrines. They don't believe that that doctrines are real. They believe that doctrine is malleable, that religion is just an self-expression of our own values. And in a sense, they've moved on to post-Christian philosophy. They've embraced stuff that's basically secular humanism wearing a bishop's mitre. But they still wear the mitre. They still wear the vestments. They still swing the thurible. That's the thing that they swing around that has on a chain that has incense in it. They still stand at an altar. Why do they do that? Because those things signal authority. They're like badges of authority. They're the company uniform for the Catholic Church. They prove that these guys are in charge. And I think this is the most insidious because they're using the church's sacred symbols to prop up their own agendas. If you don't believe the Eucharist is Christ, if you don't believe the Mass is a sacrifice, then why are you wearing the chasuble? Why are you dressed up in all of this stuff? As Flannery O'Connor said, if it's just a symbol, then to hell with it. Those monks on Skellig Michael didn't risk their lives for a uniform. They believed that it was true. So as I sat there in that beehive hut 30 years ago on Skellig Michael, with the wind howling and these New Agers chanting their nonsense outside, I kept asking myself, is Catholicism true? And I was praying, God, what do you want me to do? Where am I supposed to go? I had started to feel these stirrings about maybe I should be investigating Catholicism, and I was taking my first steps on the road to Rome, and I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And so I'm sitting there in the beehive hut praying, like, God, what do you want me to do? Because if this is true, if what these monks believed in is true, if this is true, then it's all true. And it changes everything. And that would have to change my life. If the Eucharist really is Christ, if the sacraments really bring God's grace, if the church really is his bride, then how could I walk away? How could you walk away? But if those things are not true, then it's just symbols, just aesthetics, then I'm done. I'm not going to take any further steps down the road to Rome. I'm not going to waste my life on a rock in the Atlantic or in a parish church if there's no substance there, if there's no truth there. Now, fast forward a few years, and I ended up reading G.K. Chesterton's essay on why he became Catholic. And I think a couple of years ago on the podcast, Corey and Ed and I did 2 or 3 episodes going through the G.K. Chesterton essay, Why I Am a Catholic, and that he wrote to explain his conversion. And I've referenced it many times on the show, but what he says is, I could list at the beginning, he says, when asked why I became Catholic, he said, I could list 10,000 reasons, but they all boil down to one thing, because it's true. And when I read, that was like a moment of intellectual clarity for me and intellectual integrity. I had to face the question head on. Is it true or not? And the more that I studied, the more that I saw that Catholicism wasn't just beautiful or inspiring or historic, but it was true. And that the sacraments weren't just symbols, they were real. I had no choice. I had to go all the way down this road and cross the Tiber and become Catholic. So to my listeners out there, especially you Protestant pastors who email me, you curious non-Catholics, you cradle Catholics that are rediscovering the faith, I want you to ask yourself, is Catholicism true? Pick up a copy of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Find it online. Go to a Mass, sit in a church, watch the incense rise, and ask yourself if it's real. Because if it is, then how can you walk away? And if it's not, then, as Flannery O'Connor said, then to hell with it. I hope that this gives you something to chew on. The beauty of Catholicism isn't just window dressing, it's a window to the divine, because it's true. I've said many times that In some sense, the sacraments are God punching a hole in space-time to open a portal to heaven. And the light of heaven shines through and touches us, transforms us. Now, will the church have scandals? Yes. Yes, it will have scandals. Jesus promised that the church would have scandals. Will the clergy sometimes disappoint you? Yes. Yes, they will. Jesus promised that too. Will parish or diocesan or USCCB or the Vatican staff persons frustrate you? Yes, they will. That's inevitable. But none of that changes the fundamental equation. Catholicism is true. The sacraments are real. The apostolic teaching of the church and its patrimony is true. If it isn't, there's no reason to be here. But it is, and that's why you should, like I did, come home to Rome. Or if you're here already, then stay. So, whoever and whatever comes out of the conclave, Catholicism will still be true. We can't affect what happens in the Sistine Chapel. The Lord will sort that out over time. You and I aren't going to be judged by the Lord for what cardinals did. We'll be judged for what we did. So live your faith at your level, in your life, with those around you, in the place God placed you. Go to Mass, go to confession, make use of the sacraments, pray, act charitably, do the work of the kingdom in your home, in your neighborhood, in your family, in your parish. Believe the truth, cling to the truth, live the truth. Be true to what is true. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with another episode soon. But before you go, can I quickly ask you to do 5 things? First, please rate the podcast on whatever platform you listen on. That really moves it up in search rankings. Second, please write a review on either Apple Podcasts or on our website, consideringcatholicism.com. That encourages others who are searching for a Catholic podcast to try this one out. Third, please share it with others. Send them a link or post an episode on your social media. Fourth, please write me at consideringcatholicism.com or leave a comment on our website. I'd love to hear your comments, your questions, and your stories. And finally, this podcast is 100% donor supported. My donors keep me going, they help cover my costs, and they let me dedicate more time to researching, writing, recording, and editing to get the episodes out to you faster. So please consider giving a one-time or recurring donation through the links in the show notes or on the website so that this ministry can continue and grow. And never forget, Christus vincit, Christus regnat, and Christus imperat.